We're going to get underway. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to Eckstein Hall, to Marquette University Law School. I'm Mike Goucher, and this is On the Issues. This is our continuing series of conversations with news and policymakers, people who are doing interesting, important work in this region and beyond. Today we are joined by Bud Selig, a familiar face to most of you in this room. Commissioner Selig led Major League Baseball from 1992 to the year 2015. He is currently serving as Commissioner Emeritus for Major League Baseball. He is a man who has profoundly affected the game we love, and I dare say, much for the better. Won't you please give Bud Selig a warm welcome to Marquette University. And he is no stranger to these parts. Some of our students may know this. You've been teaching a course here for what, 6 years now?
9 years.
9 years.
Matt Mitten tells me 9 years.
9 years.
Yeah, and instead of teaching today, this is what I'm doing. So I'll be back next Wednesday at my usual post.
Good.
But I've enjoyed it immensely.
You're busy. You're also teaching at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Arizona State.
I am. 3 days of this week. I have 3 days a week, and sometimes I think a friend of mine who's sitting over there thought maybe I've been overbooked, and he might be right. But the fact of the matter is that I've enjoyed it immensely. We
have a gift for you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
He does like a bit of Diet Coke from time to time, yes. Thanks, Chris.
I've enjoyed, Mike, the interaction with the students. Has been just really remarkable. I can't tell you. Generally, at the end of the lecture here in Madison, and at ASU, I let them ask questions, and boy, do they ask them. But it's tremendous, and I've been impressed not only by their depth of knowledge, which is remarkable, but we give them a lot of work. They give them a lot of work here, and they've done their homework, and you can tell by the dialogue that we have. Really, it's been terrific.
Oh, we're glad that you.
When I was a kid in college, many years ago, I thought I was going to be a history professor. That's what I wanted to be. And many a student has asked me, including one here last week, well, how did you go from that to, well, it's a long, sort of complicated story, but I'm glad it worked out the way it did. But at least at the end of my career now, I'm able to do what I originally wanted to do.
I was going to say, things did work out pretty well for you. You're going to be inducted into Major League Baseball's Hall of Fame on July 30th of this year. Can you, you've had a chance to think about it now. You've known for a few months that that's going to happen. Can you tell us what that means to you at this moment in your life?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I knew they were voting on December 4th on a Sunday, and they're always nervous. And Jane Forbes Clark, who was the chairman of the Hall of Fame, called me. Not that I was nervous, but she said it would be 4:15. They're very punctual. Between 4:15 and 4:45. At 4:17, I said to my wife, I told you it didn't happen. So I told her that. The phone was ringing. And, you know, with everything I've been through in my career, I didn't think anything could overwhelm me anymore. But this has. You know, Mike, the next day I was sitting with my friend John Sherholz, who's going in with me, and he and I have been friends since the mid-'70s. He's had a tremendous career and did a lot with me as a commissioner the last 10 years, worked on instant replay, worked on a whole series of things. So this is really, it's a great note of irony that we're going in together. So the next morning we're sitting, and there were a lot of the Hall of Famers around, but Johnny and I were just off to the side, talking. And I looked at him and he looked at me. We were both, I guess, sort of in awe and very quiet, which is unusual for both of us. And I looked at him and I said, think about this, John. Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Branch Rickey, Jackie Robinson, and you and me. That is overwhelming. That is overwhelming. It's a wonderful story, and it means a great deal to me, obviously.
You know, I look back at your tenure as commissioner. and to me, you were a change agent. And I'm wondering if that's how you view yourself and why you felt that the game did have to change.
Well, when I took over in 1992, I'd already been in the sport 23 years, really 27 or 28 if you count the years we were trying to get in. And it was, in the first 24 hours, it was a stunningly different perspective. And a student asked me the other day, what was the first problem you had? First morning I walked in, the mayor of San Francisco, who it's only 6:30 out there, was calling. The Giants were threatening to move, and he was on the phone, and he had a lot of people that we knew in San Francisco who were going to be investors, and this can't happen, and it was tough. It was. I knew then it was never going to be an easy day, but I sensed in the first year a different sense than I had had. We needed change. The economic system was what I call an economic anachronism. It hadn't been changed since the 30s, since the Ebbets Field Polo Grounds days, the name of the two New York ballparks. It didn't make any sense, and I knew that already, but now you have a different perspective. And the game, while even popular then, clearly needed change. It needed a lot of change. And yet, and I'll say this a lot today, I always forewarn my students that I'm going to talk about baseball being a social institution. You're going to hear that over and over again, because it is, but a lot of people don't really understand that. It is a social institution. People care a great deal about it. I say that our fans care a great deal more about baseball than fans of other sports do. So when a record is threatened or so on and so forth, and I understand all that. And so I knew the change would come painfully, slowly. I often was criticized for my patience, but one thing I understand was politics. And I knew I wasn't ever going to call a vote until I had the votes, something that some people in Washington don't seem to understand. And so the first, I wanted to start change. We had if the economic system was an anachronism, so was our playoff system. You had to win your division. Well, we had gone from 16 to then 28 teams, about to go to 30, and the system made no sense. So with the help of my friend Dave Montgomery of the Phillies and John Harrington of the Boston Red Sox, we had devised the wild card system. And I worked on it for a year. Oh, you can't do that. And poor Bob Costas was raving and ranting. And
he did not like that. No,
oh, he sure didn't. I once told him he didn't like this either. He started out 5'10", by the time we got done, he was 5'2". He had whittled himself down. Poor fella just agonized over this. And so we got to a meeting in Boston. And National League voted unanimously. Oh, it was wonderful. The American League voting. And had the votes, thought. It's the last time I let this happen. And next thing I know, it's 8-6 against it. What? This is something that's so obvious, other than to the... And I said, baseball is a social institution, resistant to change, always going to argue about, and I understand. So I called a 10-minute timeout, and I went to the back of the room, and there are certain people who have never forgotten it, but I don't think he would mind me telling you this. The managing partner of the Texas Rangers, who had voted no, was there, later became the 43rd president of the United States, and he said to me in Milwaukee a couple months ago when he was here, wow, I never heard language like that. And I went back there and asked him if they were crazy. If the students were here, I would just, in its direct way, there were about 48 F-bombs dropped in a very short period of time. We took another vote, and the vote miraculously was 13-1, and the one was Texas, who said, if you need my vote, you have it, but I just don't like it. Well, he likes it now, and that's just the way it was. But so the vote passed, but not without, and then of course became, Mike, the subject, the evolution of things of revenue sharing. Mm-hmm. And I knew how painful that was going to be. And I took a pounding because I was this kid from Milwaukee, so in the eyes of the New York press. Right. And it was unpopular. We first voted in 1996, so now that's 3 or 4 years later. I had a meeting here at Kohler, Wisconsin. Herb Kohler had set it up, where we just talked about the economics. And it was the most painful, and I say this not facetiously, it was a bad meeting. People who had been friends for 20 years railed at one another. It was bad. I'm writing a book, and I'll tell you how bad it was, but it was really bad. And I knew driving home from then, I really had my work cut out. I got there, the small markets and medium were in one building. The big markets had gone to another building. And then they left me a little office in another building. It was really a friendly group at that point. And we got nowhere. And guys who had been, as I said, friends, big market club said, we're tired of you little guys with your hands in our pockets. And it was bad. And so that began the long, tough process. In Florida in 1996, we finally voted, first time, there hadn't been a nickel of revenue sharing. Not a nickel. $50 million. And that was a big celebration that night. And $50 million was nothing for the sport, but a start. Mm-hmm. Well, to make a long story short here, I know my answers are worried, but I knew we had to go in, and we finally, 10 years later, after a lot of ups and downs, the labor negotiations were brutal, but we finally, in 2002, did that, and this thing built up to $500 million. And there are small market teams today who would tell you, David Glass, who owns Kansas City Club, former chairman of Walmart, a wonderful man, and Kansas City, a market obviously extremely similar to Milwaukee, said there's 10 of us, I saw him in Arizona a couple of weeks ago, that wouldn't be in business if we hadn't changed the system, and they would not have been in business. I don't think people really understood how bad things were. They were painfully bad. And so, but you knew it had to be done. You knew that the union fought it because, that was the nature of our relationship. And we had, including 94, losing the World Series, we had 8 work stoppages in my career since 1970. Horrible. But the most meaningful thing, as I tell my students all the time, is that in any of the solutions to these problems, in the labor agreement, we never solved their problems. We just sort of rolled things over, and then, in life, when you don't finally face up to your problems, they just get worse. And they get worse, and they get worse. And so, in 94 was the culmination. They went out, they didn't think we were going to hold. And I knew we were, and it's a long, terrible story. We lost the World Series, which was a heartbreaking event. And that was the low point. And so here we are, 23 years later, no more labor confrontations. It'll be another 5 years, so they're going to have 28 years of labor peace. And it worked great. In 06 and in 11, we made deals early. We shocked everybody. I knew in 6 we were really working on a deal. This is in October. We had 3 months, 4 months to go, and even before the World Series. And I got up to my office, and Rob Manfred said to me, who of course handled all this, now has to handle it himself, but said, I think we're in good shape. They want 2 players to see you, which was always. And the 2 players were Craig Counsell and Mark Loretta. They were 2 of our players and 2 of my friends, so I knew then we had a deal. And it was 10 minutes later, we talked to a couple of things. They actually did some stuff. And so But it was, I mean, there were a lot of problems around. There's always going to be, any commissioner's always going to face a lot of problems. But the piece that we've operated in has enabled us to grow in revenue from $1.2 billion in 1992 to this year be about $12.5 billion. And just, you know, I'll tell you a story, which there's so many stories I could tell to illustrate, but let me tell you. January 19th, 2000, we're having a big meeting. Phoenix, Arizona, winter meeting. And since I live near there, we always had the winter meeting in Phoenix, obviously. And the beginning of the meeting was really good because the teams, all the teams, big market, small market, everybody had begun to understand that we got to do this together. And so they gave me the unlimited authority to deal with the what we call competitive balance. And it went away when I went away, and it's okay. And Rob, but it gave me a lot of power that no other commissioner would ever have. And well, I won't say no commissioner will ever have it again, but I'm rather doubtful. In the afternoon, we're going to vote on something we have no clue. I don't want you to think we're this smart. We were going to pool our rights together and form an internet company. Now, if you were to ask me today, did you really know what you're doing? Because the company has had a success that is incredible. Incredible. It was called Major League Baseball Advanced Media, BAM is what we call it. The night before, I always insisted on 30-0 votes. I used to tell him that Richard J. Daley was my hero, but he got the votes easier than I could get them. And but I did it for a specific reason. I knew the constituents, and I knew them well. And if they voted for something, they couldn't start bitching. They may anyway, 2 months later, I told you this was terrible, and so on and so forth. And it worked. It really did for a long period of time. But here we are, we're going to a company where every club has to cede their rights. The night before, my wife and I were having dinner with George Steinbrenner, and we had a great personal relationship. We really did. He was one of the most complicated, difficult human beings that I ever met. That's an understatement. But the fact is, so I'm not going to bring this subject up. I have 29 votes. I don't have his. And in fact, he's railed and ranted a couple days earlier. I'm not letting those guys put their hands in my pocket. My rights are worth more than, he never mentioned Milwaukee. He was smart enough to do that. But he mentioned Cleveland, Kansas City, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. He was from Cleveland, so I always used to remind him of that, you know. So we're halfway through the dinner, and my wife, who's not always politically sensitive in these areas, says, how are you going to vote tomorrow, George? Oh, my heart's saying, oh, my God. And that sets him off again. He's eating dinner, and these goddamn guys from Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, and I'm tired of it, and they're living off the Yankees. I don't say a word. On the way home, she says, how are you going to vote? I said, after your act, I have no idea how you're going to vote. And I did. Now we get there. Now they pass this big resolution. George is all for that, which was surprising. And he was really difficult, but he was, whatever the reason, was great with me. We had been friends a long time by that time, although sometimes tense. But so now we start calling the roll. This is huge. This is revenue sharing. This is something we had no idea. As it turned out, it saved clubs and made the game. It's something maybe worth today. Forbes is 12 to 15 billion. It's a lot better than that. And remember, Kansas City owns the same part as the Yankees. Milwaukee owns the same piece as the Dodgers. So now we got 14. Yes, yes, yes. New York Yankees. Never forget. This is a moment in history. And I had told the clubs, you know, if we don't get 30 votes, I'm not doing it. Dead silence. Well, I know he's not hard of hearing, so I said to the guy, New York Yankees. Now you hear this grumbling. He's sitting about where you're sitting. He's goddamn, you know, there's a fair amount of profanity coming out. He finally says, after what seemed an eternity, maybe it was only 2 minutes, but it seemed like a lot longer. I don't know why, but yes. And of course, there's a lot of applause who went to and got it. And so, even though we had, you know, the big market clubs grumbled and whined the first 4 or 5 years, it's one of the great success stories. I'm proud of baseball. No other sport has anything like that, but it's changed the economics of the game. As I said, it pays fortune and dividends to everybody grumbled. That's the one thing George grumbled. I got to put $2.5 million to support those jerks in Kansas City. Well, he's gotten that back about 50 times over. But that's what you have to go through. And I tell the story only because you need to understand that. The thing I used to say, I was really fortunate. I had a mentor from the time I went in 1970, just a kid, 35 years old. John Fetzer owned the Detroit Tigers. You've heard me talk about him. He's a visionary, television visionary, pioneer in the TV business. He talked baseball into going nationally game of the week back in the 50s. Now, he was great. He just taught me after every meeting, during meetings, and so I learned then, while I was growing up in the business, but the one thing he taught me that a lot of owners never understand. One day, and this is in 1970, when he voted for something, he still had a terrific team. You know, he had Willie Horton and Al Kaline and Bill Feeney. I mean, he had really a good. He voted something that was not in his best interest. So I always rode to Detroit, as painful as that was sometimes, and then because he lived in Kalamazoo, and then I got off and came to Milwaukee, and he went to Kalamazoo. I got in Mr. Fetzer, and it's the last time he let me call him Mr. Fetzer. He said, John, how could you do that? He said to me, buddy, I don't ever want you to forget this. We're important socially. He didn't use the term social institution, but you never vote in what's in the best interest of the Detroit Baseball Club. He never called any club that. Or the Milwaukee Baseball Club. You always vote what's in the best interest of baseball. Until you sublimate everything else, you won't really understand. And I never forgot that. And so every meeting that I'd have, like, talk about, look, guys, this is in the best interest of sport. And as it turns out, with the growth of the last 15 years, by doing things together, by going to revenue sharing, by going to BAM, by doing other things, Forbes magazine just has the valuation. The New York Yankees are worth $3.3 billion. George paid $10 million when he bought them from CBS. So that's the question I used to ask him during the revenue sharing debates. How bad is revenue sharing? Look at the NFL teams. Pete Rozelle, young commissioner, 33 years old, 1961, got him to share revenue, and look what's happened. Now, it turns out George is no longer here, but today, if he was, I'd pick up the phone. You know, there may be a little profanity, but he'd understand.
You know, you touched on a number of these, Commissioner, everything from revenue sharing to BAM to labor peace to the wild card. But I went back and looked at, I mean, it goes well beyond that. You now have the most comprehensive drug testing in professional sports. Realignment, interleague play, the World Baseball Classic. I don't know if you're a baseball fan. I watched some of the World Baseball Classic this spring. Yeah. It was amazing how excited people around the world were for that. 22 new ballparks, instant replay. I mean, the list goes on and on. But really, I think you hit on it, though. Without labor peace, none of it would have been possible.
Well, that's right. Look, you know, now every one of those subjects I could spend, and the students have heard a lot about this, but let's cover steroids, because that's the most controversial. I've said it, and I'll say it again. We're a social institution. No matter what some people think, athletes are role models. I know Charles Barkley doesn't believe it, but he doesn't believe a lot of things, so it doesn't matter. But the fact of the matter is that we reflect society. Steroids were not a baseball problem. They were a societal problem. Now, the union fought us. They had fought it. Mike, back in the 80s, we had a very significant cocaine problem. Very significant. I know, because we had him on the Brewers.
I talked to Paul Molitor about it, someone who was pretty honest about his own problem.
He was, and he would be and should be, and I love Paulie, and
yeah.
you know, we all go through certain things in life, but
Yep.
that's right. So, people have said we're slow to react, but we don't know. There was no way for us to know. Guys maybe were getting shot up in clinics and hotel rooms. And there was no. And I taught John Sherholz, who would tell you if he were here today, Andy McPhail, I could take you all the general manager. But in '98, something happened. Steve Wilstein, an AP sports writer in Pittsburgh, saw a bottle of Andro on a shelf. I didn't know what the hell Andro was, but that's a big story. The next day, I went in our pharmacy, where I still go, and walked in. The druggist, who never shy, says, "I know why you're here." And it's on sale to the public. Wow, really? The best we could get out of the union. Now, they wouldn't, even with the cocaine era, where we had the Pittsburgh drug trials, 29 players were convicted, 4 went to jail. They still wouldn't give us a drug testing program. Think about that. Steve Howe, a left-handed relief pitcher, was suspended from baseball 7 times. Came back every time because we didn't have a policy. And the union fought. Now, he died 2 years later. So shame on them, but that's a whole nother story. And so here we are. The best we could get is we went to Harvard with the union to study Andro and the effects, and the union was different. In '01, I'm sorry, I'm getting ready for the '01 season, I put it in the minor leagues, because there I could do it unilaterally. What people don't seem to understand is drug testing is a matter of collective bargaining. It's a labor law. Commissioners are not above the law, no matter what you hear or think. And that's not a facetious comment. So, minor league testing started in '01. Going to go in. It's in its 17th year, and I'm very proud of that. In '02, we're down to one issue: steroids. 6:45 in the morning, we're still recovering from the 1994, and I'm sitting in my office in New York trying to figure out what to do. I got everybody calling me, owners. Some people I was glad to hear from, others I wasn't glad to hear from. Tom Glavine, a great pitcher who's in the Hall of Fame, Atlanta left-hander, was there to make sure we made a deal, and he was helpful. Now we're down, we have a weak policy on steroids, but finally we're getting something. And I'm having a debate with Rob and myself and others. And I finally think we got to do this. It turned out it was better than I thought. Because what it said is if 5 to 7% of players test positive, we can go on. They did, shocking the union to no end. That led to things. But this was a painful process. We had some congressional hearings that were brutal. The union's fighting us. There was one in the House that was, one of my students yesterday asked me if I wanted to watch it because next week steroids are the issue. I said I wouldn't watch that no matter what happened. It was painful. And we got killed. But something happened there. It's funny in life how things happen. I get there early, and it's the hearing, for any of you remember, where Sammy Sosa forgot to speak English, and Mark McGuire talked about a lot of things about, and I love Mark McGuire, and I happen to like Sammy, as a matter of fact. It was painful. It was bad. Players were bad. It was bad. The first two people who testified were the Hootens and the Garibaldis. Both their sons had committed suicide playing high school baseball and had beefed themselves up because they wanted to get to the big league. And I sat there alone listening to these parents. It was awful. And I made them, the rest of the day was a nightmare. It was the last bad one because they began to figure out it wasn't the baseball, it was the union. I remember the next morning I got Don Hooten's number and I called him in Dallas. And he picked up the phone. I said, "This is Bud Selig." He says, "Yeah, I'm the Pope too." I said, "Well, you might be, but I." So I said, "You want to call me back?" I finally convinced him that I was. And he since has worked for us. And he gives chalk talks to every team and to kids in every major league city every year. And he's done a remarkable job. And so has baseball. And this, I won't take you through, Mike, all the thing, but it got tougher and tougher and tougher. And I would want 50 games, and Don Fair would want 7. And it was, when I mean painful. And I finally, the second Senate hearing was pretty good. John McCain, who had been on the International Olympic Committee with Don Fair, finally began to figure out it wasn't these bums, it was those bums that were holding it up. And I went to the Hall of Fame, as I did every year as a commissioner, and on Sunday night the commissioner has dinner alone with the Hall of Famers. Now I'll be able to be on the other side, I'm happy to say. And they were so outraged by it. And so I said to myself on the way back to Milwaukee that night, I got an idea. I'm going to bring 6 of these guys from each generation to the next Senate hearing if they call me again. And I said to myself, my luck, now they're done with us, I guess. By wonderful happenstance, the next morning John McCain calls himself and said, I was tough on you, but I guess, okay. And I said, I got an idea, John, just to show you what's really going on. It's the real culture. I'd like to bring 6 Hall of Famers. I told him, as I'm telling you today, I wish you could hear these people. These are people, dead silence. He said, oh my God, I love it. Would you mind telling me, as a fan, who would be? I said, well, I'll start with Henry Aaron. That's all I had to say. That was it. It was over. I hadn't talked to Henry yet, but I knew that he'd come. So I got each guy. Started with Robin Roberts, who some of you may remember, a great Philadelphia pitcher. And each generation it took a guy and started with Henry. Called Henry, and well, they were just tremendous. And the night before, we had a dinner for the Hall of Fame for 6 guys: Lou Brock, Phil Necro, Ryan Sandberg. We had it was great. It was each generation. I said, you guys want to talk about what you're going to say? They didn't want to talk about it. They knew, which was great. Each one of them knew. And they were something. And, of course, Don and his assistant, Gene Orza, were sitting in the back having a fit, which, of course, made me happy, but that was another story. And that was the last time I had to go to Washington. That was the end of the whole debate. So slowly but surely. Today, you have the toughest testing program, not only in American sports, but WADA, the World Anti-Doping Association, would tell you it's the toughest testing program in America. Now, I'm not telling you it's perfect, because the chemists are always at work, but I'm telling you, our doctors are very confident that and I'm proud of that. And I talk to the trainers to this day. They say, I wish you could come in a clubhouse. It's so different today. Senator Mitchell, who I retained to do made 20 recommendations. We adopted every one of them. And they've worked and I'm proud of baseball. We're the only sport that tests for human growth hormone, which stuns me. We weren't testing for human growth hormone. One thing I learned early, and Mr. Fetzer taught me that too, and so did Bowie Kuhn, baseball is always held to a higher standard. I don't know why that's true, but it is true. And Bowie Kuhn once told me, back in 1970, 71, it's tough on commissioners, but it's a great compliment to we are held to a higher standard. People expect more from us. And so, not testing for human growth hormone today, as without me talking about anybody else, is shocking. But that's a whole other story.
I want to ask you to reflect a bit on your ownership days in Milwaukee, but before I do that, I did want to ask you one final question. Was there unfinished business for you? Was there something with the game that you saw needed attention that is either currently being addressed or you'd like to see addressed?
You know, no, that's a great question because I've been asking for it. When I left, at least on my agenda or the things I set out to do, I didn't have any more to do. Doesn't mean there wasn't more to do, but I let Joe Torre and Tony La Russa talk me into instant replay, and it's worked out great. I'm proud of them. And they were right. They were right. I was at that point nervous about too much change. Because, you know, the 23 years I was there was the most change in baseball history. And you never want to tamper with the game, in my opinion. It's the greatest game in the world. It's meant to be treasured. But like anything, it needed change. But no, I can't say. Rob Manfred doing a great job, perfect job.
How often do the two of you talk? Are you?
Fairly often, yeah. But I've watched a lot of things in life. I guess I'll tell you what I told him. I don't think Rob would mind. Obviously, he was my protege and worked for me for. I told him that when he wants to talk about something, he ought to call me. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to call him because every time I call him, I don't want him to think that here I am and he knows I talked to a lot of people. So we have a conversation. I went to New York a couple of weeks ago or something. So I went to the office just to say hello to everybody. And I got in there and I said, I'm going to be here 15 minutes and I'm going to get out of here. And I walked in, Rob was not there. Then he came back and I said, Rob, I got 5 minutes, I got to go. And he was insulted. What do you mean you got to go? 2.5 hours later, I left there. And it was, they're doing fine. And he's so well versed in everything that, and we got another labor deal, and he worked on all the things that we're talking about today, and has a wonderful assistant. And Pat, there were a lot of people there when I was there. So it was a what I said to Rob originally, we want to make this a seamless transition. This is not about me, not about you, it's about the game. And that's exactly what it was, a seamless transition.
Let's talk about the Milwaukee Brewers. And I want to go back to April 7th of 1970.
Yeah.
So this is the day that the Milwaukee Brewers come to Milwaukee on opening day in front of, what it was, 36,000 fans?
38,007 something, yeah.
Yeah, I knew you would know, yeah. But I have to ask...
You can tell I'm a history major. I do remember names, dates, places. Yeah.
How often do you think about that day, that April 7th?
Oh, you know, I've thought about that period. And I'll tell you what I think, Mike. The 5.5 years, and you know, people have forgotten, were painful. I was just a kid. But I learned a lot of lessons in life. And I was lucky. The civic response was wonderful, whether it was Herb Meyer or Ed Fitzgerald or Bob Eline, it was phenomenal. But I learned patience. Get knocked down, you just get up again. God. First of all, we lose the court case. We win in Judge Roller's court. Judge Roller's a Marquette man, I'm told. He did great. We lose 4-3 in the Wisconsin Supreme Court for strange reason. Now, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but I can second-guess lawyers as well as anybody. And the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear it, and that's the end. Now we apply to the American League for expansion, get turned down. Now we work so hard to the National League, May of 1968, never forget it. I mean, we spent 15 months. We went and visited, I went on every one of them, whether it was Irv Meyer or Bob Elan or Ed Fitzgerald, it didn't matter. They never missed a meeting. We thought we had it. We had to get unanimous vote. We got 9 out of the 10 votes. Walter O'Malley, the owner of the Dodgers, was reading the names, and I could see the M forming, and oh my God, we got it. The winner's ours, like the Oscars. And I see this M, and oh my God, Montreal and San Diego. And I think, oh my goodness. I walked the streets of Chicago that night, not too smart on my part, damn, I'm sorry, but in 1968, believe me, I'm not sure it's any better today, but it was bad then. Fortunately, the 2 Milwaukee baseball writers, Lou Chapman and Bob Wolf, followed me. I thought they thought if I'm going to get hit, they want to see us so they can write about it.
There's a story there. That's right.
What the hell, they don't want to miss the damn story, so they have that. Now, I bring the White Sox here. And if I could just digress a minute, in 1967, the spring, it's our second year without baseball, and I'm worried about that. I'm in Florida. My 2 daughters down there, and I'm in Florida. And I go over to see the White Sox. Rudy Schaefer, who was from Milwaukee way back when, in the Vec days. Rudy, we got to have a game there. We got to do something. Can't just sit idly by. People are depressed about it. They're mad. They're very angry with baseball. Ooh. And he says, well, we can't play an exhibition during the season. Later, I got them to play regular again. But then he says, if you can find a team to play, how much? I don't know what the hell I was talking about. I said, we'll give you $100,000. I don't ask. He says, we'll do it. Arthur will do it, Arthur being Arthur Allan. So I went over to see Calvin Griffith, who will make this quick, the owner of the Twins. And I liked Calvin a lot. He was a typical old baseball man, but Calvin loved money more than anything in the world. So he said, I can't do that. He can't play exhibition games during the year. I got, he had Rod Carew and Tony Oliva had a great team, and Harmon Killebrew, and I'm not doing that. Okay. I got up and I said, well, he said, I love Milwaukee and I want to help you. And I said, we need you to play a game. I'm just 32 years old trying to, talking to a guy who'd been in baseball 70 years. Well, he says, how much will you give us? I said, I'll give you $100,000. He said, I'll be there. So on July 24th of 1967, worried about the weather the whole time, and we had guaranteed all this. I had guaranteed all this money. We had about 20 to 25,000 tickets sold. And I knew this is important. It's important, more important in Milwaukee than it was anywhere else. Make a long story short, I had 3 people from the Braves ticket office. And on Friday, Carl Teffer, he was a man in charge, says, we got a problem. We're going to run out of tickets. I said, what are you, crazy? What do you mean? It's the best news of the day. By Saturday, we're out. Out. And I called Joe Reichler, who was then the commissioner's assistant, a former AP sports great man. And I said, I know in minor league ballparks they let them sell tickets on the outfield grass. Will you let us do that? He says, why, you sold out? Yeah. Go ahead. How many? I already had checked. I knew 6,250. So I go back and tell Carl Sunday morning. We can sell, you got more time. Oh my God, and the windows lines are lines. It's amazing. By noon, those are gone. Well, now we're out. We can't have. Well, to make a long story short, we had 51,144. It's a number that's stuck in my brain. And I'll never forget, there was a great sign on the left field bleachers, we deserve Major League Baseball. And I went all over the country. And But then, we ran into the National League problem, and then we thought we had the White Sox
I
bought.
was going to say that because I went to those games as a kid. You played
Sure.
one year there were 9 games, another there were 11.
That's right.
And you
That's
were
right.
drawing far bigger crowds than the White Sox.
Oh, my
were drawing.
God, it was tremendous.
Yeah.
Oh, it was really wonderful. I could tell you a lot of stories about that, but it was great. And Labor Day of '69, we have a deal done. Lawyers are working on it, and we have a deal done.
To bring the White Sox here?
Yeah. Now, I'm not telling you the American League or baseball would have approved it, because you got to take the necessary steps. But Art Allan calls and said, "I'll never forget it. I thought he's gone. Let's go. Let's finish this deal up." My brother John won't do this deal. He's going to buy it from me. He said, "I feel bad." He really felt badly. I'm stunned. While I'm talking to him, I'm reading in the paper the Seattle team has lease problems. So I call, I hang up, I'm shocked. Now, we're down to the end, and I want to say that today. Seattle deal doesn't work. I think Milwaukee never sees another major league game. In fact, I'm confident. Called Dewey Soriano, who was president. "Yeah, when can you get here?" And I called Ed Fitzgerald, my partner, who was president of Cutler Hammer, of course. He says, "How are we doing on the White Sox? Are we going to Chicago?" I said, "No, we're going to Seattle." A dead silence. And now he's beginning to think, what the hell is going on here? Well, I tell him what happened. But we went, and anyway, in October of that year in Baltimore, Maryland, at the World Series, we buy the Seattle team. But Bowie Kuhn wants to keep him in Seattle, and I don't blame Bowie. I mean, Bowie and I talked about this thousands of times after. He did the right thing. Jerry Hoffberger, who owned the Orioles, said to me that night, "I don't know." He said, "I hope you get it, but I don't know," and he was our friend. This went on all winter. All winter. Fortunately, they couldn't find an owner there. They went to a bunch of people, I can tell you all their names, Fred, Dan, this, that. Nobody wanted to buy the team. And they were bankrupt. The owner was Bill Daley, who from Cleveland, a very wealthy man, but he wasn't putting any more money in. And then to make a long story short, you asked about April. In October, I started getting calls, March, from baseball people. First time, Joe Cronin called, "Hiya, Slug, how are you?" He called everybody Slug because he couldn't remember their name. And I knew then that, but even then, and now our lawyers were out there, and it was a long, complicated deal, but on the night of March 31st, after lots of stuff going on, Judge Valin, Sidney C. Valin, awarded the team to Milwaukee. Wow. So this really incredible journey was over. And I guess what I would say to you, Mike, all the things that have happened to me since, wonderful. And you couldn't write a script like this, I guess. So, but I'm bringing the Brewers to Milwaukee will always be number one. Because the odds were so against us. I was too young to, I think, understand that. I mean, baseball didn't want to come back. Oh, we had sued them, county had sued them, state had sued. I'm telling you, I went to baseball meetings that, it's a terrible thing to say, but nobody talked to me. It's like I had leprosy. They were angry. So they weren't coming back here on their own. But it happened, and so we opened up 7 days later. The trucks had left Arizona. They were in Salt Lake City, awaiting what happened in Seattle. They were either going to Seattle or coming to Milwaukee.
Amazing.
When they got here on April 1st, I remember saying to our equipment man, who had known he had been with the Brave, "What are we going to do about a uniform?" I said, "This is not complicated. You rip the S off and put an M on it." And that's what we did.
That's what you did.
Yeah. That's exactly what we did.
So two final questions. One is, and you mentioned that had you not gotten the pilots, that we probably never would have seen another Major League Baseball game.
There's no doubt in my
Did you
mind.
have, let's go back to the late 90s and the brutal bare-knuckle brawl over Miller Park. People sort of forget that.
Yeah. I haven't. But
Yeah, I'm sure you haven't. But did you have doubts that Milwaukee was rapidly approaching the point where it might see its last baseball game at that time.
Well, it's interesting. We had that in my class in Madison yesterday, so it's really fresh on my mind. It was, I'll tell you what I told our students.
You never threatened to leave during that?
No, because that would have broken my heart, and circumstance would have forced us to. Look, here was the condition. County Stadium couldn't service us anymore. We had falling concrete. We had all kinds of problems. You remember, we couldn't talk about it, but it was there. The Mets had that with Shea Stadium. I mean, they're just, stadiums have a certain life, and especially built back then. Camden Yards in Baltimore in 1992 had changed the stadium out. You couldn't be competitive. I don't care how smart you were. This new wave of stadiums, because people came to the conclusion, you just couldn't, and so that's why nobody operated. Yes, they do in Fenway and Wrigley. Well, you know, they've spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in Fenway, and Tom Ricketts has now spent over $600 million at Wrigley, and those are two baseball cathedrals. There isn't anything else like it. So it was a painful battle. It was. A student asked me a question at the end, I guess, and I'll tell you this. In all my career, it was the most disappointing to me. Because here was an ownership group wanting to stay here. This wasn't the Dodgers moving. This wasn't all the things you read about, and of course football's had 2 or 3 of those lately. It's the group wanting to stay here. And so, without me getting into the particulars, because I could be somewhat unkind about some people, it was disappointing. But I have to say that I wasn't going to give up. And the fans were tremendous. Oh, God, they rallied. They were just tremendous. People were tremendous. Nobody likes to be taxed. But I want to say this to you as long as it's fresh in my mind. Tax will be over in a year or two. And we've had studies done by both UW and UWM. We'll have to include Marquette in it the next time, and we will. That show the Brewers bring in $330 million a year. Nobody ever talks about that. Forget the sociological things, having a team. That, I think, nobody will quarrel with. I used to say to lawmakers then, and I'd say it to you today, the fundamental question is Milwaukee a better place to live because we'll have a team in Miller Park? The economics, I could spend all day and I'll convince you, I can assure you. And they don't have any other expenditure they've ever had where they could make money or at the very least break even. But they can do a lot better. They do a lot better than that. Last weekend, walking around downtown, or Friday, I went over the Pfister. My goodness gracious, it was all Cub blue. I mean, the place was jammed. The restaurants were jammed. I never mind that. As long as they want to come to the game, I don't care who the hell they're for. That's what I figure that all out. Yeah, you have to be, you have to be practical in life, so that works out. But that's my point to you. And Miller Park becomes a source of pride. But it was a painful, nasty. A lot of stadium debates are that way, as you know, Mike. I'm not sure ours was any worse than a few others that I saw elsewhere. So, look, Bob Harlan, who I love, president of the Packers, great man I've ever known. I never thought they'd have a problem in Green Bay.
Close.
They barely won. He got 50.8%, and the opposition got 49.2%. Now Lambeau's a shrine. What were these people thinking about? And the fact of the matter is, as I said, it not only makes it a better place to live, but it economically does wonders for you. But somehow in the stadium, that used to be, that just never comes out. I sent the study, Mike, to my Blue Ribbon Committee that I use so often, Paul Volcker, Senator Mitchell, George Will, and Rick Levin, the president of Yale, who's a very accomplished economist. And they saw the study. It showed what the Brewers do, and none of them had any problem with it. Thought it had been very well done, and they agreed with it. So, yeah, it was disappointing. It was, there was a lot of demagoguery. I don't know how else to say it, so I'm going to be really candid. There was a lot of political demagoguery, and that was disappointing. But in the end, I remember when Miller Park opened and the excitement, the president was here, and none of it mattered because it had the right outcome.
Here's my final question, and then we're going to wrap things up. And I apologize for the lack of audience questions today. You came close, but you didn't win a championship. I look back at, and again, I'll show my age, but the 1982 Brewers. When you look at the players who were on that field at that time, you've got 4 Hall of Famers. You've got 2 guys who arguably...
We were better than the Cardinals. If Whitey Herzog was here today, he would tell you we were better than the Cardinals.
Well, I have to ask you about that team. When you look at that lineup...
I'm still mad about it. You know why we didn't win? One name. You know why we didn't win the World Series?
Raleigh Fingers.
Raleigh Fingers. Raleigh was hurt. He was... They're great. I just saw him last weekend in Phoenix. He was brilliant, but he got hurt on Labor Day. And Pete Ladd did his best and did well, and we won the pennant. But there were games too, and I'm telling you, and I see Whitey quite often in Cooperstown, who was a manager of the Cardinals, and he will admit, I see some Cardinal players too. I mean, you look at Cooper, Molitor, Young, Fingers, Vukovic, Simmons. Oh, they're having a big weekend honoring them in July of this year. They were really something. And a pleasure to be associated with them.
Quite a year, wasn't it?
Wonderful year. Oh, my goodness. That last Sunday in Baltimore, we had blown 3 straight. I don't know what I would have done, but fortunately we won 10-2. Yount hit 2 home runs off of Jim Palmer. Palmer still bitches about it. They were just... Palmer always says, and Robbins heard this, that they were fly balls. Yeah, they were 430-foot fly balls.
Baseball players have pretty good memories, don't
they? Oh,
they?
They do. They do.
I am going to wrap things up there. I want to thank everybody who's here today for their interest and their attention and wanting to join us. But most of all, we want to thank Commissioner Selig for his contributions to the city of Milwaukee, to the social institution of baseball, and on behalf of the law school for the good work that you do with our students here.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.